For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at King Saul. And I didn't feel that I could talk about King Saul without talking about how everything got started. So I want you to turn in your Bibles with me this evening to 1 Samuel chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8. That's where we'll begin tonight. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, running all the way through chapter 31, we have the reign of Saul. And you'll notice here in chapter 8, verses 1 through 5, we're going to start with the rejection of Samuel's sons, which is going to lead in to all the things that are going to be associated with Saul here in a moment. But notice here, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 8, and it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, the name of the second Abijah, and they were judges in Beersheba. And his sons, notice, walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah. And they said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy way. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. You know, it's a very sad state of affairs when the leaders of a people lead in such a way that the people want to go away from God. And that's exactly what happened here, right? Can you imagine that kind of leadership where people don't want to have anything more to do with God as their king? Ungodly leaders, they have a bad influence on the people. And you look around the world today, when you look at various elderships and how that they have led people in the wrong way, we can see how that can happen. I want you to look at a couple of passages with me as we begin here. Look in, first of all, in Proverbs chapter 14. And I know that you are familiar with this passage, Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 34. Proverbs 14, verse 34, it says, that righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. And so we're going to see here that as a result of unrighteousness, in the case of the sons of Samuel, what happened? Well, they're going to go away from God, aren't they? They're going to reject God as their king as a result of unrighteousness. Because they, what did it say there? It said that they walked not in Samuel's ways. They turned aside after lucre or money, took bribes. They perverted justice. Would you call that unrighteousness? Unrighteousness does just the opposite of what righteousness does. Now let's make a parallel. When he says that righteousness exalteth a nation, would it not also be true that righteousness exalteth the church? Would the opposite also be true? That unrighteousness does not exalt the church? As a matter of fact, it tears it down. Look also in your Bibles there while you're in the book of Proverbs, to Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 11. Proverbs 11, verse 11 says, By the blessing of the unrighteous, or by the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted, but it is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. Now, in the context of leadership that we're talking about here, notice, by the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted. Is not the same thing also true with regard to the church? Those who are living upright or a blessing to the church? Are not the leadership in a local congregation that which brings exaltation to the church? But look at the second half of that. It says, but it is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. You know what came to my mind? The mouth of the false teacher. Is that not the mouth of the wicked? The mouth of the false teacher does what? It overthrows. The people of Israel, they were asking for a king. And the excuse that they gave was, well, Samuel, you know you're getting kind of old, right? And not only that, your sons are a sorry lot. You see, the leadership can lead people down the wrong way. One more passage I want to look at in that regard is over in the book of Acts. Turn over with me there to the book of Acts chapter 20. In Acts chapter 20, beginning there in verse 8, remember, Paul is talking to the elders of Ephesus, and he says, take heed unto yourselves. Who's he talking to? Huh? He's talking to the elders, right? Take heed unto yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit hath made you bishops or overseers to feed, to shepherd the church of the Lord which he purchased with his own blood. Here's your charge, right? Elders, leadership, lead the people. Take heed unto yourselves, take heed unto the flock. Verse 29, I know that after my departing, grievous wolves shall enter in, where? Who's the among you? The eldership. Not sparing the flock, and from among your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away the disciples after them. Wherefore watch ye, remembering that by the space of 3 years I cease not to admonish every one night and day with tears. So when we look at our situation here in 1 Samuel chapter 8, this whole thing about a king got started because the leadership was not doing what they ought to be doing. So here's the question that I have for us. Today, when a leadership is not doing what it ought to be doing, how is that going to affect the local congregation? The very same way, they're going to be asking for something different. But here's the problem. Their solution was faulty, right? They said, well, you know, Samuel, you're old. And your sons are a sorry lot. So we got a solution to this problem. What was their solution? Make us a king to judge us like all the nations. What they're saying here is that, you know, it worked for other nations. Shouldn't it work for us? How many people today, sadly in the Lord's church in many places, they want to be like the nations round about them. They want to bring in denominational ideas, denominational philosophies, denominational worldviews. They want to bring those into the church. They want to be like everybody else. But that's not the answer. You know, turn over in Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 23. In Jeremiah 10 and verse 23, Jeremiah says, O Jehovah, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. Is that not what's going on right here in 1 Samuel chapter 8? They didn't like Samuel's getting old. They didn't like the way his sons were perverting justice. And so I tell you what, we've got an idea. Let's be like the other nations. let's have a king that will judge us. Now again, their solution was faulty because they wanted to have what? A king, right? Singular. God has never wanted singular rule among his people, has he? There's the priest. There were the judges of the various tribes. And even right now, they were being judged by whom? Judges, right? God has always wanted a plurality. What's going to happen to Israel with this single king? How's it going to work out for him? Not very well. So, as you can imagine, Samuel's not very happy about this, right? You look there in 1 Samuel chapter 8, look at verses 6 through 9, and we're going to see that what actually happened here is that they have rejected God as their king. Look at verse 6. But the thing displeased Samuel, and you can understand why. When they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed unto Jehovah. Now, notice there for just a second. Here we have Samuel is in a bad way. He's disappointed. He's hurt. He's disgusted. And what's the first thing that he does? He prays. Is there a lesson in that for us today? When we have difficulty of any sort, and I don't care what it is, any sort, what ought we to do? First and foremost, pray. That's where we begin. That's where Samuel began. So he prayed unto Jehovah about this situation. Notice in verse 7 it says, "And Jehovah said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should be king over them, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them out of Egypt, even unto this day, in that they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee." He reminds Samuel that I'm not surprised by this. Why? How long have they not been doing it? He reminds them of their rebellious history. Samuel, you ought not to be surprised by this. In verse 9 he says, "Now therefore hearken unto them, hearken unto their voice, howbeit thou shalt protest solemnly unto them, and shalt show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them." Hold that in your head for just a second. And back up to verse 7. When Samuel's approaching God with regard to the rejection, did Samuel take it personally? What did God say? Samuel, you're not the one being rejected here. I'm the one being rejected. You know, I got to thinking about that. Don't we feel like Samuel sometimes? In being rejected, we preach the truth, and we're rejected, and what do? We take it personally, don't we? You remember when Saul was persecuting the church, what Jesus said about that? Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? To persecute the church is to persecute Jesus. What's the parallel that we can make to that? When people reject us for speaking the truth, who in reality are they rejecting? They're rejecting God, right? Samuel, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me as their king, that I should be king over them. I don't want you to miss that phrase. King what? Over them. They don't want, what they're saying in reality is what? We don't want God over us. So, in verse 9 again, he says, now, hearken unto their voice. And by the way, we could go to Deuteronomy and other passages and told there are prophecy that this is going to come. Matter of fact, he knew so much it was going to come that in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 14 through 20, he gives things that a king is supposed to be doing as he is king. That's how he knew this was going to happen. One of the things that was interesting to me was he needs to have a copy of the law. And he needs to read that law every day. I wonder how that would have changed the various kings in history if they'd abided just by that one thing. Copy of the law and reading the law. I wonder how that would change our lives. How it would change the world, right? But I want you to notice here that God says there in verse 9, I want you to give them what they're asking for. But before you do it, he says, I want you to protest solemnly unto them. Protest. Say, this is not a good thing to do. So I want you to warn them. And when I think about warning the people, I can't help but think about Ezekiel. Turn over in Ezekiel with me for a moment. And let's look at Ezekiel chapter 33. This same idea is found in Ezekiel chapter 3, but I like Ezekiel 33. And let's read verses 1 through 9, and we'll make emphasis as we go through here. And remember what's happening. Israel wants a king. Well, and who's this king going to be? Why are we talking? Because the king's going to be Saul, right? He said, I want you to warn the people about what they are about to have. So, in Ezekiel chapter 33, beginning in verse 1, it says, And the word of Jehovah came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak to the children of thy people, and say unto them, When I bring the sword upon the land, and the people of the land take a man from among them, and set him for their watchman, if when he seeth the sword come upon the land, he blow the trumpet, and warn the people, then whosoever heareth the sound of the trumpet, and taketh not warning, if the sword come and take him away, his blood shall be upon his own head. He heard the sound of the trumpet, took not warning. His blood shall be upon him, whereas if he had taken warning, he would have delivered his soul. But if the watchman see the sword come and blow not the trumpet, and the people be not warned, and the sword come and take any person from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at the watchman's hand. So thou, son of man, I have set thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore hear the word of my mouth, and give them warning from me. When I say unto the wicked, O wicked man, thou surely shalt die, and thou dost not speak to warn the wicked from his way, the wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thy hand. Nevertheless, if thou warn the wicked of his way to turn from it, and he turn not away from it, he shall die in his iniquity, but thou hast delivered thy soul. So what does God tell Samuel to do? In reality, what is Samuel right here? He's a watchman. And he has a responsibility to warn the people of the coming disaster of what they're about to do. Do you think that we are to be watchmen today? Shake or nod. Do we need to be the kind of people who are willing to warn people? Will we warn our neighbor? Will we warn our family members? Will we warn the brethren? If we don't, their blood is on our head. You see how serious that is? For every one of us. We need to be warning. So, God tells Samuel, I want you to warn the people. So what does he do? In verses 10 through 18, he's going to tell them the way of the king. In verse 10 he says, and Samuel told all the words of Jehovah unto the people that asked him for a king. And he said, this will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. Now, Samuel does the very thing God tells him to do, right? Warn the people. Tell them what's going to happen when you have a king like you want. A king that you say, because you want to be like all the nations round about them. Now he goes through the next several verses and tells various things that the kings are going to do that you're not going to be very happy with. But then notice in verse 18, he says, and ye shall cry out in that day because of your king whom ye shall have chosen you, and Jehovah will not answer you in that day. You see, when it gets too late to effect the change, then they're going to realize what? We made a bad mistake. But it's too late. You know what that tells me? It tells me that sin has consequences. Oh, yes, you can be forgiven of any sin when you repent. But many times, there are still consequences that you're going to have to deal with. I'm sure that there were some of this crowd who were saying, you know what, Lord, please forgive me. I really shouldn't have done this. He said, oh, okay, let me take the king away from you. No. They still had to suffer the consequences. So notice what happens. They ask for a king. God gives them what they ask for after a warning. But then, after they get the warning, and then he tells them what the king's going to do, he tells them what the result's going to be. You're going to cry out not wanting this king later on. And what do they say in the next verse? Verse 19. But the people refused to hearken unto the voice of Samuel, and they said, nay, but we will have a king over us. Even after the warning. It's like the blowing of the trumpet and hearing the trumpet, but you ignore the trumpet. He told them exactly what was going to happen. And they said, what? I don't care. This is what I want. And notice the next verse to me is very sad. Let's read 19 and 20 together. But the people refused to hearken unto the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Up to this point, who had been fighting their battles? And whenever they did the right thing, how many times did they lose? You know what a goose egg is? When they did the way God said, they won every single time. But now, what do they want? They want to have a king like the nations. They want to call in, I was going to say B team, but I think this is probably more like the D team. You know, you got A team, B team. We're talking D team. We're talking way down here, right? They're calling in that group now, that king, to be our ruler, to be our judge, to fight our battles for us. God, we don't like the way you've won for us. You know, it kind of almost be like a coach winning the Super Bowl, and the owner says, I don't like you, we're going to fire you after winning the Super Bowl. Their decision was going to affect former generations. Don't we realize that? Do we not realize that our decisions affect other people? How many times have you heard, well, I'm not hurting anybody but myself? That is a bald-faced lie. You are never only hurting yourself. You're hurting other people by poor choices, by bad actions. You're hurting others. And so now Israel, because of the choice of these people on this day, their generations on down through all the kings are going to be suffering great hardship, and eventually they're going to go into captivity. They're going to lose their land. And I contend that all that comes right back here to chapter 8. That's where it all got started. When they rejected God as their king. So, we want our king to judge us. We want our king to fight our battles. Verse 21, and Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he rehearsed them in the ears of Jehovah. I can just almost see this. Lord, I told him everything you said. And yet what? They still rejected me. Rejected you. Even after all the warnings. You ever feel that way? How just bumfuzzled, is that a word? Bumfuzzled you are? When? Is it? Sheena don't know nothing. But you go to somebody, you give them the argument, you tell them, it's just crystal clear, and they what? They don't accept it. They'll go off and they'll try to come up with some other argument when you haven't even answered the argument before you. Right? What's happening here? Same kind of stuff. Verse 22, it says, and Jehovah said to Samuel, hearken unto their voice, and make them a king. And Samuel said unto the people of Israel, go ye every man into his city. You know what I have written in my Bible right here? Be careful what you ask for. Be careful what you ask for. They asked for a king. They're going to get a king. So, go home. We're going to get you a king. In chapter 9, we have a man coming onto the scene by the name of Saul. In chapter 9 and verse 2, it says, "And he had a son," talking about Kish, "whose name was Saul, a young man and a goodly. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward he was higher than any of the people." Now I contend, and if you don't agree with me, then you're wrong. I contend that God gave them their first king, the kind of king that they wanted. Now I know God chose them, but God chose them a king, the kind that they wanted. One that did what? Stood out. Head and shoulders above the rest, right? And as you're going to see here, he was a mighty warrior, powerful man, great presence. That was the kind of man they wanted. Isn't it interesting that later on, I know David's not in our study because that would take too much time, right? Because later on, when God chooses David, and he goes to the family, and all the sons come by, and they say, Samuel says what? Not him, not him, not him, not him. Do you have any other sons anywhere? His dad did not even think that David was worthy to even be there in the discussion. And yet what? That's the one God chose. For God does not look on the outward appearance of a man, but what? On the heart, on the inward man. So, here we have Saul. And here in chapter 9, Saul is going to be, his dad is going to say in verse 3, "Take now one of the servants with thee, arise and go seek the asses." They've lost their donkeys. And so he goes searching for them. He goes to the hills of Ephraim, into the land of the Benjamites. He goes into the land of Suph, and they haven't found him anywhere. And Saul says, well, let's go home before Dad starts worrying about us. But there was a servant there that gave some advice that I think we need to always give heed to as well. He says, let's go talk to the man of God. 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 times in there he says, the man of God. I got to thinking, whenever you have a question about something, who would be the first person you'd want to go to besides the Father in prayer? You don't have any idea? A man of God. Let's go talk to the man of God. There's one thing that we think about Saul at this moment. Now, Saul's good moment's going to be very short. Not very long lasting. But here was one of those moments when he listened to advice. Listen to advice even from, how can I say it, maybe an underling, his servant. He was willing to listen to good advice no matter where it came from, right? What about us? I've been reading a lot recently in the Proverbs, and I'm just amazed how many times it talks about listening to counselors, listening to wisdom, getting understanding, right? So that's what Saul does. And so they go to Ramah, in search of Samuel. The asking young maiden, is Samuel here? He is, or he's coming, he's here, but he's about to go up on the high place, and he's about to make sacrifice because the people are waiting for him, and they're not going to eat until he comes up there and blesses the sacrifice. And so he's waiting, and Samuel comes. But then we have, in verse 15, it says this. Now, before Samuel and Saul had come together, Jehovah had revealed unto Samuel a day before Saul came. So this is the day before. He says, tomorrow about this time will I send thee a man out of the land of Benjamin, and thou shalt anoint him to be prince over my people Israel, and he shall save my people out of the hand of the Philistines, for I have looked upon my people because they cry, their cry is come unto me. And so God gives Samuel instruction. I'm showing you who the next king's going to be. Then they meet. Samuel is about to go up to the high place, and I find it kind of interesting here. In verse 19 it says, and Samuel answered Saul and said, I am the seer. And by the way, back in 19 it says, in former times a prophet was called a seer. He said, go up before me unto the high place. You know, if we're not careful, we just pass right over that. Go before me. What that was a place of respect. And not only that, go before me, I am a prophet. Respect. Then we see something about Saul. As this begins to unfold and he sees, I'm going before the prophet? Look at verse 21. And Saul answered and said, am I not a Benjamite, of the smallest of the tribes of Israel? And my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Wherefore then speakest thou to me after this manner? What do you see here? Humility. Saul realized that what's taking place here, he's being in an exalted situation. He says, I'm from the tribe of the Benjamites. What are you doing this for, right? I don't deserve it. I'm from Benjamin. We're also going to notice that he is going to also eat with them, and he's going to be in a chief seat. And then he says, let's go to the rooftop. Let's have a chat. Leave your servant behind, and I'm going to talk to you. And that's what we'll pick up tomorrow, or next Wednesday.